Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Gayle Carson. Welcome to Living Regret Free, a program that shows you how to live a better and more joyful life. As an added bonus, I invite you to listen to an introduction to my Mindset Matters program, which ties into this so well. Go to www.sobmindset.com. It's free, and I know you will enjoy it. If you'd like to contact me personally, drop me a line at gaylecarson13@gmail.com or go to my website, www.spunkyoldbroad.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter. My guest today is Dr. Eric Jones. He studied relationships for over 20 years and discovered most people are unaware of the single most important relationship factor. He teaches numerous courses that clarify what relationships really are about and has a PhD in experimental social psychology, has been named Teacher of the Year at 2 universities, and has been the opening speaker at international conferences on well-being. He's most interested in showing people how relationships are fundamental to every area of life and showing people how to connect the dots between relationships and living with purpose and meaning, building a legacy you can be proud of, and living a life of profound influence without regret. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm curious in this intro that I said about you that most people are unaware of the single most important relationship factor. What is it?
Well, I think for most of us, we approach relationships, such as a marriage or a close friendship, looking at the other person and thinking, even if it's sort of subconsciously, wow, they're pretty cool. I like being around them. And we sort of focus in on what we get from the relationship or the other person, right?
Correct.
Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, except that's not really a relationship, right? A relationship is what's between the two people. And I think in our culture, especially here in the United States, we kind of have this culture of, what do I get out of things? And what do I get what I want all the time? And we can be a little self-absorbed and self-focused. And it's very easy for that to seep into our relationships. And we end up, at least in my field in psychology, we end up even thinking of the person as being this thing that needs stuff from others, right?
Well, that's true. I mean, a relationship is two ways, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And even when it's good, I mean, there's always things that happen in between. There's no question about that. So, in this research, though, that you've been doing, what what have you found out about happiness? I mean, there's so much talk about it. And I really was on this path to really focusing on happiness and joy. And someone said to me, nobody pays for that. So what did you find out about happiness?
Well, this is a great field. It's exploded over the last 20 years with the advent of positive psychology back in 2000. And now all of a sudden, it's okay to talk about happiness and well-being and virtues and all these fun things. That used to be sort of off limits for researchers, believe it or not. And I'm really glad people are starting to look at this. What we know about it right now in terms of happiness and well-being and all these areas is that there are many things that sort of folk psychology has always talked about that are now being validated by the research, right? So we know that, or we think we knew, that being compassionate is actually a good thing for you. Having empathy is a good thing for you, all these kinds of things. And the research is starting to show that, right? We're starting to get lots of studies on these kinds of things. But we still, if you read a lot of the positive psychology, we still fall back into this, what do I get out of it mode, right? So for instance, one of the things I talk about in class frequently is gratitude. And this has been a hot topic for the last 10 years or so. And there's all sorts of little books and exercises out that say, hey, if you take the last 5 minutes right before you go to sleep and think about 3 things you're thankful for, and you do this every night for 2 weeks, as long as 6 months later, your well-being will actually have been elevated. And people look at that and go, oh, well, then I should be more grateful, right? And
Well, it's
that's,
true, yeah. But and I think another part of that, which is part of gratitude, is also forgiveness. I think that that's something that I've learned. I found that very difficult early on to forgive people. I mean, if they really wronged me, but now I find that that does me more ill than it does them. So that's another thing that I've learned along with gratitude is forgiveness.
yeah, forgiveness is a big one. I think for most people, it's probably easier to think of three things they're grateful for 5 minutes before they go to bed than doing any real significant forgiveness like what you're talking about. That can be very tough, right? I mean, you found it difficult.
Oh yeah, definitely, and that's for sure. So, are you telling me that happiness is or is not as simple as doing what research says?
Uh, Let me make a little distinct. Let me be a fussy academic for just a second and make a distinction. So when we're talking about happiness, usually in the research, we're talking about sort of how we feel. It's a little more mood oriented. If we're talking about well-being, they usually talk about that in a broader sense, a bigger context, sort of how is my life going? So if you're talking about happiness, then you can actually do a lot of the things that they say to do in the research, and it will elevate your mood. You'll be a little happier, you'll feel better about things, that kind of stuff. But if you actually want to increase well-being, it really isn't that simple. It gets to be a deeper, people are complicated, right? uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, and there's a lot to life. And so to boil it down to a few small factors, I don't think would be believable to your listeners, honestly. But if you're trying to increase well-being, there's a number of things you need to do, and you need to be pretty consistent with them, right? And this gets back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning with relationships. It's the same thing there, right? You need to appreciate and value the other person. You need to do that consistently. You need to show interest, listen, these kinds of things. And you've got to do it not just one afternoon and really knock it out of the park, but you need, strangest thing, my wife expects me to pay attention to her frequently. It's
Or you're in the
first,
doghouse. You're in the doghouse if you
yeah,
don't.
tell me about it. Yeah. And, it's funny because when we first got married, I had my PhD in social psychology. I teach courses on this stuff, or did that back then too. And I really didn't get it. I mean, in terms of lived experience, I was not there, man. I tell you, it was some interesting conversations between us before I sort of hit the books myself and said, I need to know this beyond theory and research. This has got to be real life stuff.
Well, and that just shows you that even the teacher can learn, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I have one course I teach every spring, and I can't wait to get in there because I learn different things every year from students in that, because it's very discussion based. And it's just fascinating listening to them. And some of them, they're not trying to be this way, but just in the course of a conversation or discussion in class, they'll just say some of the most profound things. It's amazing.
Well, it is interesting out of the mouths of babes, so to speak. But so are you telling us that if you think differently, if people continue to think differently, it can move them closer to happiness?
Yeah, and let me get back to your original question, which I did not answer well at all. What is this one big factor? The one big factor I have found, and you can see it if you're really looking for it, you can see it in research, but no one really talks about it. And that is taking your mindset of how you see yourself and others and completely flipping it. Now, I'm talking about people raised mostly here in the United States. We tend to have this very individualistic mindset that, I'm my own little person. I do my thing my way. And when you really start looking at research and you start talking to people about their lives, nobody is like that. No one is this singular, insulated self. We're all extremely interdependent and interconnected. And so we spend a good bit of time in classes talking about just this fundamental difference in these sort of models of people, right? Is it this really sort of entity view of the person, or is it this much more hyper connected view? And the more we talk, the more the students are like, we are really connected. It's
So,
shocking to some of them.
what is this class called that you're teaching?
Well, one of the classes I teach is called positive psychology. And so it's an overview of sort of the life well lived. But I teach a course on personality theories, social psychology, a number of other things.
Wow. So, what would you say, as an expert in this, that happiness looks like in everyday terms? Is it our laugh? Is it our smile? Is it our general demeanor? What is it that we could recognize in everyday terms?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that it's a lot of the things you listed, but I would back up and say you've got to sort of have that mindset change I was just talking about. And one of the ways we get this across in class is to have people think about how, like, one part of the body, like your hand, your hand seems like just a hand, right? Seems like its own thing. But when you start thinking about everything that the hand needs to function, you realize it needs a circulatory system, it needs the respiratory system, it needs a nervous system, it needs a digestive system to give it energy. It needs all the parts of the body for the hand to function. And when you start looking at people the same way and you realize we're not just these separate entities, we're part of a highly interconnected, sort of woven together fabric. And when we see ourselves like that, then I start to see you as sort of part of me. We're part of the same thing. You're not my adversary or someone I just get stuff from. We're part of the same body in a sense, right? Just like the different parts of a body are the same. So when you get that right, then all these other smaller pieces, right? The more elemental parts, like, being kind and listening well and all that kind of stuff, those are properly oriented. And once they're properly oriented, really small things make a huge difference in our relationships and therefore our happiness.
Well, I would agree with you on everything that you said, but I'm wondering if a student were to come to you and say, okay, Dr. Jones, I hear what you're telling me. I see what you're teaching me, but I'm not happy. How can I become happier? What would you tell them?
I would probably talk to them a little bit about this view of the person that I just described and how, you're really much more connected than you probably think you are. And we'd go through some of that. I have a couple little exercises I do with people, whether I'm teaching them in a class or coaching or whatever, that help them understand sort of their fundamental nature. Once they get that, they actually that starts to make them feel better, because part of what makes us human is this desire to be connected with others, right? I mean, that's so fundamental to us. And so just the recognition that that's at my core who I am, that I am connected, that usually is the biggest jump start. And then I give them little things to do, really small activities to start working on right where they are. So whether you're really introverted or extroverted, or you have lots of friends or you don't, just start where you are. That's the most important thing. Be authentic with who you are. Start right there and start working at that level, and just try to be consistent and start growing. So I would say one of the things we do is, this might sound silly to you. I don't know too many people who've done this, but one of the activities we do is I have people go out and find a spot and sit on a bench or something where there's a good bit of foot traffic going by. And I say, pick a person who's walking towards you and just look at them and think about what sort of positive attributes, characteristics, abilities they might possess that could be beneficial to everyone around them. Just think about what kind of person they might be and how valuable they really are as a person. And then think about them as they're walking by and try to sort of embrace them and value them in your mind. And then after they've gone, pick somebody else, a minute later, pick somebody else and do the same thing. And do that for about 15 minutes. And we have some really interesting discussions from something that simple. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff students come up with, like just watching people and being mindful and intentional about appreciating another person.
It's so interesting that you talk about that because I unfortunately am someone who talks to everybody about everything, and I just never really walk into a room and meet a stranger, and so, but I've made a lot of friends that way, and as a matter of fact, I was coming home the other day from a trip and met somebody who plays in a symphony orchestra, and now he's comped me tickets to that symphony anytime I want to go. I've met other people that actually have hired me to do jobs for them because of our conversation on a plane. I mean, and even at events, if I go in and people say, "Oh, I don't want to go because I don't know anybody," I say, "I want to go because I don't know anybody, and I'm going to meet all these people." So it's really interesting how you perceive all of this. But I guess another question I'd like to ask, since you keep mentioning your students, do you find that your students take your class or classes for particular reasons? I mean, are they taking them just because they have to, because it's part of their major or minor or whatever, or are there people that take your class for a particular reason?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, the politically correct answer among students is, oh, they love all my classes, right? But the reality is,
well, we're teacher of the year at 2 universities, so I'm sure they do.
There's something to that, but I also teach statistics and research methods, and nobody's taking that because they want to. So, but the courses I'm talking about, like positive psychology, that's not a required course. And the last couple of years, they've slotted it, not because I wanted it there. They've slotted it at 8 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, wow.
So if I can draw students at 8 a.m. for an elective like that, then they're probably taking it for the right reasons. They're interested. And the first class of the semester, I usually ask them, so what are you thinking you might get out of the class? Why are you interested in this? And most of them are, right on point with things the course is about, meaning and purpose in life, all that kind of stuff. All the stuff you said doesn't pay, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's why they're there.
Interesting. Well, I mean, that's very heartening to know that because, so many people say, oh, young people don't think about anything really important or, they don't think about this or that. And I find that young people today are very conscious of social situations and very conscious of social causes and so forth. So I can see where they would be very interested in something like that. But what are some of the things that you think someone should do in the beginning, other than, let's say, going out like you're saying and watching and observing? And what are some of the other things that you have them do?
Well, some of the things we have them do is, like I said, start small and start where you are. I try to tell them that over and over and over, because what you don't want is to give them something that's overwhelming socially, and then they fail or they don't even try, right? And then they don't want to do anymore. So I give them really super small things. So I give them a set of questions to talk with somebody about over the next, I think this one lasts a week. And so you're trying to get at least 4 times that week, you're supposed to answer these questions to each other. And the questions are, I should have had the list out here. The questions are, what made you happy today? What made you sad today? Excuse me, what was challenging for you today? And I can't remember the fourth one. And so you're basically just, talking to a friend or a family member, and you're going through the same set of questions repeatedly for a week. And again, it seems like, well, that's awfully simple. Does that have any kind of an effect? Yes, it does. When you really sit and listen to someone, and then they talk about those things, and then they sit and listen to you talk about the same kinds of things, and you do this repeatedly, you start to build trust, You start to build some empathy, right? These sort of cornerstones of relationships start to appear, and you really start feeling very positive about the other person and yourself. And you've created a nice space where you can start to build some depth to your life. I mean, most of the things we do are super simple. And that's where I would tell people to start. Start with something really small that's manageable and that you can be successful at. And then you can start doing more complicated things later on, more challenging things, more things that are going to be uncomfortable.
Wow. So if you were to tell people, I mean, what kind of, how do you grade your students? I guess that's what I'm, if we're talking,
what a great class,
about
right?
happiness, how do you grade them?
Totally on mood. No, they're not happy, they don't pass. We do have some exams in the course on some book material in positive psychology. So they do take some exams, but honestly, that's less than half of their grade. The bulk of their grade is based on their engagement, not just in discussions in class, but in these activities that they do outside of class. So if they're doing those things, and they do, they write up small reflection papers on their experience, and we talk about it in class, and it's really obvious to me which ones are really doing the work based on the little short reflection papers they write and the discussions in class. It's hard to fake that kind of thing. If you had a real significant experience with another person or in a certain situation, then it shows. And so if they're highly engaged and they are productive and they're doing the work, then they do very well in the class. And if they're not there and they're not very engaged and they're not doing the assignments, obviously not so good. Even if they do well on the exams, that's just not good enough. That's not what the course is about.
So how would you know? I mean, do you see a great deal of change from beginning of the semester to the end of the semester when you're working on these things?
For a lot of the students, I do. I see really significant changes. Some of them, when I take evaluations of the course at the end, use phrases like life-changing and transformative and these kinds of things. So clearly their time that they invested with other people has made a significant impact on them. And that's why I can't wait for the class every year. I just, it's really validating.
So in other words, if I'm not an extroverted person, if I'm not someone who, displays these kinds of things really outwardly, it might take some doing for me to get into that position.
If you're talking about being really outgoing and that sort of thing, yes. But if you're talking about just seeing some significant increase in sort of the depth of your relationships and interpersonal experiences and those kinds of things, no, it doesn't really take that much. I think it just takes a little guidance and some consistency, and you start to really see this. Because this is, my argument is this is what's in us anyway. We're created to be connected. And so we just need a little help getting oriented the right way and a little nudge in exactly what that looks like and how to do it. And then we'll be fine.
Well, I think we need more teachers like you, Eric. So we've got about 2 minutes left. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like our listeners to know about pursuing happiness, and how is the best way to get in touch with you if someone wants to find out more about what you do or how you do it?
Okay, well, let me answer the last part first. If you wanted to contact me, the best way is to email me. The best email is ericjones62@gmail.com. So you can contact me via email at any point. That's fine. And we can talk about whatever you're interested in, whether it's some sort of a coaching service or just interested in kind of what I do in my classes. Last things to tell people, I would say, I'd repeat what I said at the beginning, start small, be authentic, be who you are. Try to be very consistent and connect with people. It's about connection for people. All the research shows that. People's lives experience have shown that. Even you were talking about that, right? It's about connecting. And so just work on really simple ways to improve your connections with those around you. Start with your family and friends, those people you're already somewhat comfortable with, and then start small and be consistent. Just keep at it. And if you need help, find someone who knows something about this stuff. It's not that hard, but it can have such profound effects on your life. I mean, this is what it's about. I mean, I was inspired listening to you talking about, how you you meet people everywhere you go. I'm like, man, that's great. You should model that for everybody. We should follow you around with a camera and say, do that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to close now because we're out of time. But this weekend, I was with a whole bunch of celebrities. I mean, from Martha Stewart to Ice-T and so forth. But one of the gentlemen that I met, I happened to run into at the coffee shop next door to the hotel I was staying, because the coffee shop in the hotel was closed. And I went up to him and I said, oh, this is who I am. And he says, I know who you are. And I said, really? He said, yeah, you're one of the most real people I've met here. And I thought, he said, you are really authentic. And I thought, wow. So, you never know how it's all going to play out.
That's a great compliment. I tell you what. That's a
well,
good one.
Everybody, if you want to know more about Eric, you can email him at Eric, ERIC, Jones, 62@gmail.com. Thank you so much for being with us today, Eric. We really appreciate it. And keep on teaching, because we need people like you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's show. I choose my guests carefully, so if you have someone you'd like me to interview, please drop me a line at gaylecarson13@gmail.com. In the meantime, check out my intro program, Mindset Matters, at www.sobmindset.com. See you next week.